Healthy anger, how it can improve our relationships. All right, so this is a webinar which is part of our monthly webinars in the Wellbeing Codes Hub. So welcome to everyone who is part of the Hub and to anyone who's just joining for today's webinar. Okay, so this is such an important topic because anger is I believe, is a misunderstood emotion and misused emotion. And when we are confident with anger and we can differentiate between the different types of anger, know when it's most useful to just regulate as a solo practice, just, deal with anger internally on our own versus when it's more appropriate for the anger to be expressed and shared with another person. So just having some confidence around how to approach anger within yourself is going to make a massive difference to your mood and your relationships, which is what we're all about here at the Wellbeing Codes. All right, so let's make a start. So it's useful to start by reflecting on what your personal beliefs are about anger. So how can we do that? You can ask yourself, what do I believe about anger as an emotion? What do I believe about my own anger? What do I believe about expressing my own anger? What do I believe about when someone is angry at me or towards me? What do I believe about women's anger? What do I believe about men's anger? So it's really useful to just take some time at the start of this webinar to reflect on your own belief systems about anger, because your beliefs about anger are obviously going to impact on the way that you manage anger and your behaviors and your choices and the degree to which you spontaneously express anger or attempt to suppress it or let it build up and explode. And obviously our beliefs about anger, most often come from our childhoods, because it was during childhood that we were witnessing the grown-ups around us deal with anger or relate to anger, and we're going to have internalized some of their beliefs about anger and just adopted them as truth. But that's not necessarily always the most healthy approach to anger, because some of our parents or caregivers' beliefs about anger may have been faulty themselves. So hopefully today's webinar will dispel some of those myths. Okay, so my definition today of healthy anger is anger that leads to a positive change. So even though expressing anger in the moment can lead to a lot of tension and awkwardness or bad vibes, in the short term, in the long term, if that anger leads to a positive improvement or change for the relationship, for the connection, then it's better out than in. Okay, so healthy anger is the instant attunement that we have to a sense of justice and equality. Now, this is an immediate reaction. So healthy anger is that immediate microsecond reaction we get when someone has wronged us. Okay, and because this reaction is so immediate, there's not even time for us to process at a rational level about whether the degree of anger that we're feeling is warranted or justified or valid or whatever. We just bypass all of that and go straight to, I feel angry because I can detect that I've been wronged here. Okay, and it's an important survival reaction that we have. We're like, that's a very protective response that we have. To feel angry in the instant means that all of our resources are now available to go to fighting the injustice. Whether it's justified or not, it doesn't matter. Our biology is ready to fight off any injustices and any inequalities. So I call it our internal justice meter. Our internal justice meter in our brains gets activated whenever we sense wrongdoing. And it triggers the amygdala to expend energy towards fighting to restore justice and equality. So you can see from a survival point of view how adaptive this is, right? To go, okay, there's an inbuilt reaction that I have in my brain that says, no, I won't stand for injustices and inequality and mistreatment or abuse. So it's a very adaptive survival response. And if we were all more comfortable with the fact that anger is a natural human emotion, then we might be a bit better at making space for anger to come up. But people have really attempted to suppress and minimize or dismiss our experiences of anger because they cause such an inconvenience for the other person, that a lot of unhealthy practices have taken place across humanity to deal with anger that we're trying to undo here, you know, or we're trying to shed light on in this webinar. So healthy anger, anger that leads to a positive change. So I'm going to talk about two types of healthy anger today. And the first one I like to call relational anger. So this is anger that's felt in a relationship with a close other, where there's an underlying expectation of mutual care, love, or consideration. So if we're in a close bond or relationship with another person, whether that's an intimate relationship or a friendship, for example, there's this underlying expectation that we both care for one another and we're considerate of one another's feelings and needs, and that's mutual, that's two-way, it goes both ways. So naturally, whenever someone behaves in a way that feels like they haven't considered us, our needs or our views or our feelings, then we're going to feel this relational anger. And that is something to be celebrated, because that instant relational anger gives us an opportunity to express, hey, you know, that didn't feel good, or I didn't really like how you did that. And what I'd like to happen is this. And we get to set a boundary and we get to express our expectations for the relationship and how we would like things to go between the two people. And so can you see how beautiful that type of anger is, relational anger, that's coming from a place of love. And it's love for ourselves, but it's also love for the relationship and the connection. We care about the relationship enough to get angry when there's a lack of reciprocity. Okay, what a good, lovely, healthy thing. However, when anger is suppressed, silenced, or hidden in important relationships, it's called subjugation. That's the name of a schema or a pattern where we, instead of expressing the anger, we've learnt to suppress it and hide it and push it down. And that usually comes from conditioning in childhood, where we got the message that if I was to get angry and express my anger, say with a parent or a caregiver, that their reaction would be too frightening to handle, because they might react with further punishment or rage, or they might become really depressed and fragile, and then the child feels guilty for getting angry at the parent, and therefore they subjugate and they literally swallow their anger. Now, if that pattern, that subjugation pattern or schema, is not addressed, eventually in time, it will lead to long-term bitterness and resentment in that connection. So this is a pattern or a schema that I've healed in myself. Ironically, when I started to heal this schema, and it meant more expressing of my needs and my emotions, it actually did lead to the ending of my marriage, because, you know, I wasn't self-silencing anymore. So I was being very vocal, very honest about my frustrations and my relational anger, which did lead to the dissolution of that marriage. But I would say that it was absolutely worthwhile healing this pattern, this subjugation pattern, because I'm now in a almost 7-year relationship with someone where I have not allowed subjugation to rule or dictate my expression of anger, and it's definitely a more healthy outcome. All right. So this lovely quote here by Harriet Lerner, one of the world's legends on healthy anger, I'd say. She says, "Thus, we too learn to fear our own anger, not only because it brings about the disapproval of others, but also because it signals the necessity for change. We may begin to ask ourselves questions that serve to block or invalidate our own experience of anger. Is my anger legitimate? Do I have a right to be angry? What's the use of my getting angry? What good will it do?" These questions can be excellent ways of silencing ourselves and shutting off our anger. So that is something for you to consider, the inner self-talk that goes on that could be a way of self-silencing or dismissing your anger or bypassing it or flicking it off, when actually you would be much better off by validating the anger and bringing it out into the open. Okay, so more on healthy anger. Activism. So activism, when it's fueled by anger, can also lead to positive changes, because enough people get together and they're all angry about the same mistreatment and the same lack of consideration, and enough people gather in groups and they say, no, enough is enough, we're not tolerating this treatment anymore. And that's a very good thing, because that also leads to systems changing, ingrained ways of doing things that aren't best for everyone can end up being changed, which is great. So this quote, "Anger is known to be a precursor to social activism that motivates people to act on their sense of injustice or concern. It can engender a sense of rightness about their behavior." Yeah, so when I think about activism, I think about, real action, like, for example, protests, like the one in the picture here, where there's this sense that, people are coming with a specific idea about what needs to change. And writing letters, and spelling out the exact type of change that is required, as opposed to getting on forums online, on the comment section on Facebook and just venting on Facebook when that doesn't really lead to anything productive or any kind of change. So hopefully that's obvious about what activism actually looks like. So these are two things that I'd say are healthy examples of anger: relational anger and activism. All right, so let's also have a look at unhealthy anger so we can spot the difference. Okay, so unhealthy anger, anger that does not lead to change or damages meaningful connections. So one example of this is what I'm calling today self-serving anger, also known as rage-fueled anger, also known as road rage anger. So this is a heightened state of frustration in response to things like everyday life hassles or disruptions to one's own comfort or solo needs, without taking into account the relationship or connection to others. So this type of anger, this type of rage-fueled anger, is underpinned by entitlement. The idea that, well, I'm entitled to express my rage and throw things and curse and threaten people, and insufficient self-control. So not enough self-regulation, not enough self-talk going on to sort of moderate that rage. Okay, so the reason why this is unhealthy, an unhealthy form of anger, is because it harms other people, basically, and it probably is doing harm to the body as well, to sort of to build up those kind of levels of rage because of being so frustrated at everyday life hassles is probably not good for the nervous system either. So imagine if you had this expectation that every time I'm going to get on the road and drive my car, there's going to be no traffic and I'm going to get from A to B within 20 minutes. But then as life happens, you know, there's traffic and there's a traffic jam and whatever. So there's just so much frustration and rage building up in the body, in the nervous system, if you're approaching life in that way, you know, believing that life is going to be easy for you. So I hope that makes sense. You can see that that's how unhealthy that can be. So it's unhealthy for the person experiencing that kind of level of rage and frustration on a frequent basis. But it's also unhealthy for other people who are in the firing line of that kind of rage. So a good example of this kind of anger is, maybe some of you have seen Tom Cruise lose his cool with his staff this week because they were not obeying social distancing rules, which is a fair complaint to have, to say, well, you know, there are rules and expectations in this workplace for people to follow social distancing rules because of COVID. But his way of dealing with his frustration and anger was this sort of rage-fueled anger, which was to just unleash on people. And it's unleashing in a way, like a good way to ask yourself is like, would I feel comfortable speaking to my spouse in this way? And if that's a no, then it's probably not a good idea to speak to any other humans in that way. Because, you know, if we believe that it's okay to unleash rage on other people, then we're really seeing them as less than us, if that makes sense. We're sort of believing that we're entitled to express rage in this way that is really, really harmful for the person on the receiving end of that. Because, you know, if people have been brought up in environments where there's been, you know, yelling or abuse or that kind of really frightening levels of rage, then that's going to be such a disturbing event for the person on the other end of receiving that kind of rage. So that, you know, if you want to go and check that out on YouTube, that's all over the news this week. If you want to see a good example of rage-fueled anger. All right, so another variation of unhealthy, what I call unhealthy anger, is disempowered anger. Okay, so this is anger about someone else's mistreatment and other person's actions that lead us to feel disempowered, used and abused, victimized, etc., even though the power dynamic potential is equal. So if we feel angry because, say, our partner has treated us in a way that doesn't feel good, then the power dynamic potential there is actually equal, because they're two adults choosing to be in relationship, not a power imbalance like a parent-child dynamic, for example. That's an example of the power dynamic potential not being equal. But in an intimate relationship, it's definitely equal, because we can choose to be with that person or not. We're not forced to be with that person. But when we start to feel disempowered and like this anger is not leading to change, then we're going to start to feel disempowered. We're going to start to feel used and abused, victimized. And we really, really want to avoid feeling that way in our adult lives where possible. Now, I can acknowledge that there are some people in situations in some countries where that is so ingrained that it's very hard for people to sort of get out of those situations. Yeah. In some countries. And I also can acknowledge that this is the kind of anger that happens in domestic violence relationships, where there's one person that's feeling very disempowered, okay, and feeling like they're stuck, that they don't have any options, that they're trapped, that they just have to keep tolerating that kind of treatment and put up with it, even though technically speaking, you know, we do have choices in our adult relationships. Now, so this kind of disempowered anger is underpinned by dependence or low autonomy. So Rachel's last webinar was on codependent relationships. So she really did go in depth into this type of situation. So that disempowered anger is underpinned by, you know, this real dependency. So the belief that one cannot cope without the relationship, even though it's quite unhealthy and not mutually beneficial, and it's not based on giving and receiving love. So the connection or the relationship is not based on being loving towards one another, but more of a control power dynamic where one person's the controller and the other person is more submissive. And that's a real power imbalance. And feeling angry when you're in a disempowered position is a really unhealthy position to find ourselves trapped in life, because it's going to manifest in all sorts of problems in the body, feeling low self-esteem, not being able to function well in other areas of life. All right. So healthy anger versus unhealthy anger, how can I tell the difference? Okay, so we can feel into the energies of these different types of anger. So I'm going to help you today to feel into the sort of energy that goes on when these different types of anger are active, so you can start to know which one it is. And for those of you who, you know, are working with clients who struggle with anger, this is going to help you also. All right, so these different energies that emerge in childhood can help us understand a bit about the difference between our types of anger. Okay, so the energy of the angry child mode, which I sort of link to relational anger, is very spontaneous and expressive, and it kind of comes out in the moment that the wrongdoing occurred. So it's very immediate, very spontaneous and quick. So it would sound something like, that's not fair, or don't do that to me, or stop doing that, or why are you being mean to me? So can you see how it's spontaneous, it's natural, it's like our inner angry child. It's immediate, and it hasn't probably had time to filter whether we're right to feel this way or not. That's not the point. The point is that it's an immediate response to something that's off in the connection. And that's something to be really honored. Okay, versus the enraged child. So the energy behind our inner enraged child is there's sometimes this desire to get revenge or take our anger out in a way that will lead to immediate relief, but it might do damage. It might do damage to property. It might harm another person. It certainly will intimidate the people around us. So it's sort of like, why should I have to put up with this shit? You know, and it sort of flies off the handle. And there's a certain entitlement that's kind of going on with this energy. So there's this feeling like I'm justified in expressing my anger in this way and overriding the sort of fact that it's going to do damage or harm to other people. And then the energy of the angry, our inner angry protector. So this angry protector mode more is like a wall of anger. It's like this prickly coat that we wear, and it's unclear where the anger comes from because it's not spontaneous. It's not in the moment. It's just a build-up of anger that might have been going on for years and years and years. So you can see it in people when they're walking around, and you can see this angry wall. So they might come across as quite prickly or hostile, but it's not clear why they're angry, because there's no context as to why they're angry. And that's a disempowered kind of anger, because it's not leading to change. It's not being channeled into assertiveness. It's just an angry vibe. And you can go and walk around Woolworths or Coles or Bunnings, and you can really get a sense of this angry protector kind of energy. And you can see it in people's faces. And it's a disempowered state, because their anger should be used, to spontaneously guide relationships back to a more healthy state. And so often this angry protector wall started in childhood, when the person was disempowered, when there wasn't an equal playing field, where there wasn't an opportunity, where a child can't just, go to a parent and say, hey, stop doing that, or stop treating me like that. So they have to then start wearing their anger as a shield, which is kind of like keeps people at arm's length. It's a way of protecting the person from further hurt. Okay, so that's how we can sort of feel into these different energies of anger, to know whether it's a healthy variety of anger or unhealthy. Okay, so some more on this relational anger. So our inner angry child is the part of us that is angered by mistreatment by others, lack of empathy, patience, and consideration by others. So it's natural that we should feel angry whenever we feel like we've been mistreated, someone isn't having enough empathy or consideration for our experience, then anger will be a natural response to that. And that's what I call relational anger. So the angry child is the part of us that is angered by mistreatment. Oh, I've just said that, that's repeated. So the anger expressed is spontaneous, intense, and focused on the injustice of the treatment, with a plea to restore justice and fairness in the connection. So what a gift. Can you see? Isn't this great? That we feel this anger in our relationships, that we're able to spontaneously detect when the connection feels off. We just need to learn how to be more skillful and how to channel this relational anger into something productive, which I'm going to talk more about towards the end of the webinar. Okay, however, this self-serving anger, the inner enraged child, is the part of us that projects frustration, annoyance, and anger onto others, and sees other people's actions or everyday life hassles as the cause of their discomfort. So has this real idea that the whole rest of the world is to blame for the person's stress, and feels entitled to take that out on the world in whatever way feels impulsive in that moment, even if it does damage. So the anger expressed is rage-fueled, linked to low frustration tolerance and entitlement. It's threatening. It's quite scary to be around this type of anger. It's menacing and it's harmful to our connections. So this disempowered anger, so when spontaneous anger was expressed as a child and dismissed or punished, or expressed in our adult relationships and is dismissed and no changes occur, the anger has nowhere to go. So, we express this anger or this protest about how we feel, and if it's shut down or, deflected back and dismissed, then the anger's still there on the inside, but it's got nowhere to go, if that makes sense. So now it's just a private solo experience where the person's feeling the anger, rightly so, but it's not leading to change. So it stays inside. So the anger remains. This is the point. Just because someone says, well, you're irrational or you shouldn't be feeling angry, that doesn't automatically lead to us not feeling angry. So the anger remains inside, but since no change is occurring, the person starts to feel victimized, mistreated, and then needs and neglected. So this starts a process of victim-like narratives about the relationship, such as, well, they don't care about me at all, they are just using me, etc. So this is a real concern if things get to this point in our close relationships, because at this point, it doesn't feel like the relationship is reciprocal. It doesn't feel like there's an equal give and take going on. It feels like, well, I'm considerate of them and they're not considerate of me. And, you know, these beliefs, they don't care about me at all. They're just using me. So we do not want to get stuck in that disempowered anger. We want to bring it back to more expressive anger, relational anger that would lead to change. And if it doesn't lead to change, then we need to consider whether it's a relationship based on reciprocity or not, or whether it's one-sided and unhealthy, therefore. All right, so a couple of unhealthy gender-based messages about anger. Some women have received the message that their anger is irrational, unladylike, hysterical, or crazy. So to avoid these judgments, they may self-silence. So this is a very common reason why women would suppress their anger, because they don't want to be seen as demanding or crazy or hard to deal with. What's the word? High maintenance. Yeah, that's oh, I don't want to be seen as high maintenance, so I better not express any anger. Okay, so that's a very common gender-based unhealthy pattern. And for men, so some men have received the message that all men's anger is always dangerous and harmful to others. So men may also self-silence in their relationships in situations where actually validating their relational anger is warranted, where it would be more healthy for the man in that situation to say, no, I'm right to be feeling this anger, and this kind of treatment is unacceptable. And it's appropriate for them to be quite assertive. But if they've been conditioned with the message that men's anger is always harmful, because sometimes in the past, yes, there were, men that came before them whose anger was harmful. So maybe this blanket belief is just applied, this broad brushstroke of, well, all men's anger is a harmful thing. So they may be self-silencing for that reason. So we don't want to see that either. We want both men and women to be in connection to this healthy relational anger and not subjugating. So knowing how to differentiate your relational anger from your self-serving anger will be a massive help to forming healthy connections with others. So relational anger is telling us that there is something unjust about another person's actions, and without expressing the hurt, it can lead to resentment, bitterness, or feeling victim-like in the connection. So being able to validate your inner angry child, which is the part of you that naturally feels angry whenever there's an injustice or lack of consideration, is the first vital step towards using anger for good in our relationships. Okay, so this inner self-validating, yes, of course I feel angry about that. It's only natural that I feel angry about that. That's the first step. So when we validate our anger privately as an internal experience, we achieve a few important things. One is that we regulate our arousal levels. So anytime we're feeling angry, our arousal levels naturally go up because they're like, we're registering threat. So our nervous system is on high alert. So when we validate our anger, we say, yes, it's only natural that I'm feeling anger, our arousal levels start to come back down eventually. But if we invalidate our anger and deny that we're angry and say, no, I shouldn't be feeling this way, that's going to actually heighten our arousal levels, and we're going to feel more distressed as opposed to less distressed. The other thing that happens when we privately validate our own anger is that we become clear about the unmet need that's triggered the anger and hurt. So when we start to say, yes, it's only natural that I feel angry about that, let me take a look at what exactly I am angry about. Oh yeah, I didn't really like how he spoke to me like that, in that way. Or I didn't really like how she said she was going to meet me for coffee and then just didn't contact me for 2 days after. So we can get more access to the reasons why we're feeling angry and the unmet need, you know, that unmet need for consideration, the unmet need for communication or respect. We can get better in touch with the unmet need underlying our anger. And that's a very powerful position. And thirdly, we can more easily start to generate solutions and requests for change when the arousal levels come down. So we can communicate better when our arousal levels come down. And we can channel that into assertiveness. And we can say, hey, I was really feeling really angry just before. And I want to talk about why I'm feeling angry. So we can do that better when our arousal levels come back down. Okay, so the question, to vent or not to vent. So depending on the stability of the relationship, just how solid a foundation there is in the relationship, many couples can actually tolerate some letting off steam, some real venting, some degree of explosiveness, I suppose, in the midst of an argument. So we don't need to completely squash the intensity necessarily of our anger, because there's some really nice spontaneous truths that can come up when we're in touch and expressing our anger. However, I will say it's rare to be able to maintain full composure and equanimity in the face of anger. So it's a real advanced skill because the nervous system is already registering threat the minute we feel angry. So it's starting to sort of get really worked up, really defensive. So it's quite rare to be able to speak in quite a skillful way when our nervous system is getting up around that sort of that level. So if venting anger at a partner leads to a defensive response from the other person, the unmet need for the first person will go unseen and be overshadowed by the argument itself. So if venting just leads to this defensive response, then something else needs to happen. So probably a bit of time out, not arguing. If the person's being defensive, it's probably not very fruitful to stay in that argument and try and push your point forward if they're in a defensive stance. So I'd be saying time out, go back, self-validate, and then approach the conversation when the arousal levels have come down in both people and say, hey, I noticed that, you know, you became quite defensive when I was talking about that thing yesterday. And I was wondering if now would be a good time to talk about it now that we're feeling, you know, a bit more settled in ourselves. It's really important to come back to conversations, even if there was defensiveness initially. However, by suppressing anger in our relationships, we're effectively self-silencing. So hiding our complaints, hiding our boundaries and our non-negotiables, and participating in the creation of an unhealthy and unbalanced relationship dynamic where only one person's needs are allowed to be expressed. So this is called subjugation. So, you know, in the wellbeing codes, we're all about healing these past patterns and activating more healthy pathways forward. So here, this lovely quote here, again by Harriet Lerner. She says, the old anger in, anger out theory, which states that letting it all hang out offers protection from the psychological hazards of keeping it all pent up, is simply not true. Feelings of depression, low self-esteem, self-betrayal, and even self-hatred are inevitable when we fight but continues to submit to unfair circumstances. When we complain but live in a way that betrays our hopes, values, and potentials, or when we find ourselves fulfilling society's stereotype of the bitchy, nagging, bitter, or destructive woman. Those of us who are locked into ineffective expressions of anger suffer as deeply as those of us who dare not get angry at all. So she's saying venting, if it doesn't lead to change, is unhealthy also, because it just keeps us locked in this unhealthy pattern. So something more proactive, like taking space from a relationship, would be far more productive and healthy than just staying in a relationship where you vent and it doesn't go anywhere. It doesn't lead to any change. All right, so now let's talk about the way forwards, the healing of all of this. So how can I alchemize my anger for good? So I'm going to talk about 3 pathways for channeling anger, but mainly focusing on the first pathway, which is the point of this webinar, which is this relational anger. So if you can identify that you subjugate and you suppress your anger in your relationships, the pathway forward for that is assertiveness. So we'll talk about assertiveness in a second, a process. If you can identify that the anger is rage-fueled, and that sort of road rage, that's self-serving anger, the pathway forward there is to have compassion for other people and patience. So probably meditating, probably engaging in some kind of regular, frequent practice where you're bringing your nervous system back down to a more healthy state, healthy level, your stress levels down, because that type of rage is not going to be healthy, for the person experiencing it or for other people around them. So I'm not going to talk any further about that sort of more entitled sort of rage today. And if it's disempowered anger, where you're feeling like, oh, I feel so stuck, the person doesn't care about me, then the pathway forwards for that type of anger is autonomy, is to recognize that you do have choices, that you do have power, that you can say no to certain relationships, that you can leave certain relationships if all of your attempts at expressing your needs have been met with denial and dismissal, that we actually do have a choice to walk away from unhealthy relationships. Okay, but I'm going to flesh out this first one a little bit more, this relational anger. Okay, so firstly, some essential ingredients for healthy anger, which is either, this assertiveness or activism. One ingredient is that we need to have a belief in our own power as an agent of change. This is really important, that we have to be able to feel into our solar plexus, feel into your gut right now, put your hand on your gut, and to realize that there's this fire inside of you, that there's this fire in your belly that says, I know what's right and I know what's wrong, and I'm an agent of change, and I'm a powerful being, and I can stand up for myself, and I can say no, and I can assert myself. So for some of us, we actually just need to connect to that power within our belly, because it might have been disconnected in childhood, where we weren't allowed to connect to that kind of inner power, that kind of anger that fire in our bellies. So that could be as simple as just putting your hand on your stomach right now and going, yes, I trust in that fire in me that says no, I know what's fair and what's not fair, what feels right, what doesn't feel right. Okay, so that's one ingredient that we need for healthy anger. The second is that we need to have faith in the robustness of the bond or the relationship or the system that you're in where you're expressing your anger. So if you've lost total faith in the robustness or the health of the bond or the relationship, then you're probably going to give up and you're not going to bother expressing your anger or your needs. If you've totally lost faith and you're like, they don't care about me, this is never going to change, then we've lost our connection to healthy anger. Okay, so if we were wanting to create some kind of change in our intimate relationship, we need to actually have this faith that the relationship bond, that the love between these two people is enough so that this anger can actually lead to something healthy in the future. Okay, so I trust that makes sense, and that these two ingredients are internal. These are personal, private experiences. This has got nothing to do with the outside world. This has got to do with your own belief system. All right. So relational anger, healing from subjugation. The advanced skill that we're wanting to cultivate is assertiveness. So this is the healing of subjugation, is assertiveness. So this is a healthy communication strategy where we express how we feel and what we want. Okay, so I'm going to guide you through a very brief imagery here today where we sort of feel into this three-step process of assertiveness. All right, so to do that, usually I invite everyone to close their eyes. So you can do that right now. Just invite you to close your eyes and imagine a situation. It could be either in a current relationship or a friendship that you're in, and the other person has done something, either intentional or unintentional. You don't know. It's not your job right now. Your job is to just feel into the anger that you feel about the treatment. Okay, good. So step one is a private internal experience, and I want you to imagine putting your hand on your heart as if the inner angry child lives there. And you say to this side of you, my anger is valid, real, and important. And I know that seems so simple, but a lot of people really skip this step, is just validating their own anger. Say, my anger is valid, real, and important. And for some of you, you may need to repeat that for 5 whole minutes till it really sinks in. Okay, so that's step one. Step two is you say to yourself, I have the power to express my needs and what it is that hurts me. So you might imagine yourself now in this interaction with this other person, and you're saying to them, you know, I feel really hurt and upset and angry about what you did. What I want is ... and then you express what your need is. You know, what I want is for you to think about the words that you use when you're talking to me, or I want you to follow through with your promises and communicate with me, or let me know if you're not going to be there for me. Yeah. So you're saying what you want. Okay. And now part of that imagery process is I want you to now imagine the reaction that the other person has to you expressing your needs. So allow your imagination to play out their reaction, their response, knowing what you know about them. Okay, good. So often at this point, we imagine that the other person's response has been negative or dismissive, and it hasn't gone down well. They haven't really responded well to our assertiveness. Okay, this is normal. This is normal and common. Okay, but that's where step 3 comes in. So this is really important, is at step 3, if the other person has dismissed our request, it's really important to not slink down into that disempowered state. So we want to go back to self-validation at this point. And if we can do step 3, that can prevent a lot of arguments that don't go anywhere. Because when the other person dismisses what we need, sometimes we feel like we need to justify or defend ourselves. But it may be just that they're not ready to hear what we have to say. So step 3 is we imagine going back to this self-validation, saying to ourselves, it's okay if they need some time to take in what I've said. I trust that they care about me, so I don't need to argue or defend my needs with them right now. Now, that is going to be a really important, powerful tool for you at step 3. If you're validating your own anger, then you don't feel the need to kind of continue on an argument with someone who's not ready to hear about your needs. So you can more easily sort of take some time away from the argument. You can say, okay, this isn't really getting us anywhere. Let's come back to this at another time. And then you can go away and you can just validate your own anger and get more in touch with your unmet need. Okay, and get really clear about what it is that you want more of in the connection. Good. All right. So that is an imagery that you can practice again and again and again, anytime. Just sort of go inwards, use your imagination and this 3-step process, and the other person invalidating you and you validating yourself, even in the face of their invalidation. So just want to take a look at some beliefs that block this self-validation of anger. One belief is, I'm just too sensitive. Other people wouldn't be angry or upset by this, so therefore I shouldn't be. They probably didn't mean it. I shouldn't be angry if they didn't intend to hurt me. So this is really important because you're right. Sometimes they didn't intend to hurt you, but it still leads to you feeling hurt and angry, even though they accidentally upset you. So sometimes it's still important to express our anger and hurt, even if the other person did it unintentionally, because otherwise, how would they know? Or if I express my anger, that will just further justify their poor treatment of me. I'm trapped. I'm damned if I do, damned if I don't. So I may as well just shut up and be silent, because if I express my anger, they're only going to see that as an opportunity to get mad back or punish me. All right, so some new beliefs that would support more self-validation of anger can include, my nervous system is not the same as anyone else on the planet. My anger is valid for my unique makeup. So you just become okay with the things that make you angry. They're not going to be the same as other people. We're all different. We've all got different histories, different nervous systems, different brains, different personalities. So you just go, well, my anger is unique to me. You know, I get angry about some things that other people don't get angry about, and that's fine. Another more healthy belief is, even if they didn't mean to hurt me or it was unintentional, it's still my job to assert my needs and boundaries so we are clear. So we can be clear about the expectations for the relationship. And in a healthy relationship, my partner will want to know what they do to hurt me and not use it to justify further poor treatment. So, you know, this is a healthy belief that, you know, someone is going to want to hear about my anger. They're going to care about my feelings, my experience. All right, so any questions so far? It doesn't look like there are any, or feel free to put your hand up if anyone wants to chime in. Okay, but I just want to also talk about EFT tapping for relational anger. So I'm going to demonstrate something that you could use if you were feeling a buildup of anger in your relationships that can help to bring the arousal levels down. Because when we bring the arousal levels down, we're going to be better at communicating, about asserting ourselves, and getting change. Oh yeah, so the last of the alternative beliefs, missed it. Let me see, let's go back. Yeah, so this one here, in a healthy relationship, my partner will want to know what they do to hurt me and not use it to justify further poor treatment. So I'll give you guys all the handouts as well, so you don't have to, you know, worry if you missed anything here. All right. Okay, so some of you might have heard or seen tapping before, but if we were using it in this situation, And we're just going to go probably for another 10 minutes. Okay, so if anyone needs to pop off now, that's fine. You catch this bit in the recording. Okay, so what EFT tapping for relational anger might look like is, and without going into too much of a description of what EFT is, but it brings stress levels down. So that's going to be a good thing. All right, so what we do is we start on the side of the hand and we tap here and we come up with an overarching statement, something like, even though I feel so angry right now, I deeply and completely accept myself. So you guys can do this now. Even though I feel so angry right now, I deeply and completely accept myself. Even though I feel so angry right now, I deeply and completely accept myself. And then we go to the inner eyebrow. So much anger on the temple. All this anger under the eye. They hurt me so badly. Above the lip. I feel like they don't care about me. On the chin. They've done this a number of times. On the chest. They never consider my feelings. Side of the rib. They just want to hurt me. Top of the head. They don't care at all about me and my feelings. What about me? This isn't fair. I matter too. I'm always thinking about them. It's not okay for them to do this. It's not okay for them to get away with this. I'm not okay with this treatment. Okay. So then you would breathe in and out. And then you would just pay attention to what comes up for you. If any new thoughts, new images, new memories come up for you, new beliefs, and you would note them. And then you would continue with a tapping sequence. So it might be, even though I have this belief that they don't care about me, I deeply and completely accept myself. Even though I have this belief that they don't care about my feelings, I deeply and completely accept myself. Even though it feels like they don't care about my needs, I deeply and completely accept myself. I'm in all this pain. They don't care about my needs. My needs are not getting met. They don't seem to understand me. But I understand me. And I know what my needs are. And I care a lot about them. And I'm sure they care about me too. So I'm going to express my needs. And I'm going to do it over and over and over again. And I'm going to be clear about what it is that I want. And I'm going to be clear about what it is that hurts me. And I'm going to assert my needs. And it may cause some temporary tension and discomfort, which in time will lead to a positive change. So that's a tapping sequence that any of you could do to deal with this relational anger, because it's important that we have a positive relationship to anger in the realm of our relationships, so that we don't subjugate, we don't suppress it, we don't push it down. We feel confident to keep coming back to it and expressing it and asserting our needs And it's important that we get some beliefs going on that will support that, to support us to be assertive. Because the minute we start believing that, well, they don't care at all and there's no point talking about how I feel, then the relationship takes a sort of a negative turn. And, you know, it's only a matter of time before the relationship deteriorates, and we don't want to go down that path. All right, so I will include all of this in the handouts for you, and I'm just going to take a look at some questions. So one question is, I wrote down that the underlying causes of self-serving anger was 1, entitlement, and 2, it's lack of self-control or insufficient self-control. So I wonder if that was related to that question. It's all in the slides though, which you'll get. So the other question is, do you have any tips on working on entitlement? You gave tips on working for inner self-talk. So for entitlement, the new beliefs would be more along the lines of compassion and empathy for other people. So it would be things like everyone on the planet has hard days. We all suffer from frustrations and hassles in life. I'm not unique in my experience of frustration in life. Everyone is just trying to get along. So it's any sort of beliefs that really foster a sense of compassion for other people and patience is going to help with getting rid of entitlement. You know, I care about how I impact on other people. You know, I don't want to harm other people. I don't want to harm my relationships. All of those would help with entitlement. Okay, so anyone, did anyone want to sort of chat through any of the questions? How do we work with the survival brain during this process? Yeah, so that's the sort of that lizard brain, that real sort of survival, you know, amygdala response. Ideally, we want to create some kind of space for us to regulate. So it's very hard to deal with the survival brain, the lizard brain, when there's pressure from the outside world to respond. So if that's been activated, and then we have the additional stress of someone demanding that we work through an argument, that can become too overwhelming. So we may need to sort of say, sorry, I can't function, I can't express how I really feel, I need to take some time out. Does that make sense? So the way to deal with the survival brain is to say, I need to create a safe environment for myself. So it's quite an autonomous process. So you say, I can't, you know, I need to remove myself from this stressful environment so that I can be in a safe environment, so that I can process what's going on internally for me. So you, to whatever degree possible, you remove the external threats. Yes. So I hope that helps or applies. It says, especially for a male client that I have. Yeah, so I would be encouraging that male client to take responsibility for creating a safe internal experience and writing down a few healthy beliefs that he could say to himself that will help him regulate his emotions. And that could be just, I'm feeling very stressed right now, I'm feeling very activated right now, my nervous system is my responsibility, that type of thing. Okay, the question is, how would you work with a couple where one person expressed anger in a healthy way and another unhealthy? Yeah, so I would probably try to, what's the word, encourage the person who's expressing their healthy anger to take somewhat of a leadership role in saying to the other person, to say something about what they want for the relationship, to say something like, I want both of us to be able to express our anger and our complaints with each other in this relationship. I want you to feel safe, that you can come to me and express your anger and complaints. And I also want to feel safe that I can go to you and express my anger and complaints with you. Is that what you want too? So you're working with the person who's probably got the more resources the one that's using the more healthy anger, to take somewhat of a leadership role, because they probably have a little bit more insight, a little bit more psychological resources that they can kind of use that for good and steer that and say to the other partner, I want both of us to be able to express our frustrations, complaints with one another, and for there to be a safe space for that to happen. Okay, so I trust that is useful. Yeah, so don't underestimate the power of that person with the more resources to guide the relationship to a more healthy place. All right.